What's up everyone? Today I am covering common mistakes that new pier anglers, new jetty anglers, honestly new dock anglers encounter, and mistakes that are easily fixable. So I'm gonna keep saying pier throughout the video, but just know that it really applies to any land-based place, piers, jetties, inlets, anything like that. All of these mistakes and fundamentals are really applicable to anyone who fishes those areas. It's worth mentioning that I've been fishing places like these for most of my life, and while I do pretty good a lot of trips, there's plenty of trips where I don't catch much or I don't catch anything, and anyone who has a little bit of experience knows that that's kind of part of fishing, and that's part of why fishing, I think, is so awesome, because if it was easy, if you were successful every single time, it wouldn't leave that desire, it wouldn't light that fire under you to get better, to do better, and to question, what did I do wrong? What could I change? What could I do to put myself in a better situation to catch fish? So just know that if you're not catching them every time, completely normal, but let's dive into the video. Let's cover some fundamentals, some things that you guys can do to put yourself in better situations to catch more fish from the pier. We'll divide this up into three main mistakes, three principles, if you will. The first mistake is picking the wrong spot. So you've made it out to the pier, but you're fishing in the wrong spot on the pier. There's thousands of feet, thousands of areas that you really could fish, and you're just not fishing in the right spot. Secondly is you're presenting your bait, your lure, whatever it is, in the wrong way. You're not actually doing the right presentation. It doesn't look natural, and that's why you're not hooking any fish. And lastly, you've done everything right, you've hooked the fish, but the way you're fighting the fish is completely wrong, and you end up losing it because you're not using the right techniques to actually land the fish and get them on the pier. So those are going to be our three common mistakes that we're going to be fixing. Let's dive in. The first mistake is picking your spot on the pier. Where are you actually going to be fishing? Should you be fishing near the beach? Should you be fishing at the end? Should you be fishing in between the sandbars? Who's to know? There's a bunch of different places that you can be. So let's break this down. The first thing that I'm gonna suggest you guys look for is bait. Now, bait may not always be as obvious as it is in this clip that I have playing right now. This giant dark school around the end of the pier, that is all pilchards, that is all bait fish. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But a good indicator of whether or not there is bait where you are is there a shadowy spot and does it move around? It's probably going to be bait. If there's bait, that is the first place that I'm gonna try fishing. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fish on the edge of the bait school. I want my bait to be presented in a way that it looks natural, but it's standing out just enough that it's gonna get eaten. Because if I'm fishing my bait that's exactly like the rest of them, smack dab in the middle, that's a needle in a haystack that a fish is never gonna be able to find. So we wanna put them right on the edge, right in that strike zone. If there's no obvious bait, the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look for the actual fish that might be around. I'm gonna look whether it might be snook hanging out underneath the pier, whether it's some Spanish mackerel patrolling up and down, or it's a giant school of jack crevalles that are just passing by. A lot of the time, anglers will miss, they'll just make the mistake of not looking in the water and not paying attention to their surroundings, and there's a giant school of bluefish swimming right next to them, and they're just not fishing next to those bluefish. If they went another 50 feet to the south, or 50 feet to the west, they would have actually caught some fish. So paying attention to your surroundings. Pro tip, get yourself a pair of polarized sunglasses. If you're just wearing sunglasses from the dollar store, get yourself, a cheap pair of polarized, and you're gonna be able to see into the water a lot better because the polarization allows the glare to be cut down on the water, and you're gonna be able to see some fish and put yourself in a better situation. I can't tell you guys how many times that I've seen a guy that he's got the right rod, he's got his expensive reel, he's got the right bait, and he's snook fishing. He's underneath the pier in the right kind of location, but he didn't take the time to walk up and down the pier and just look and see if there were snook hanging around. 3 piling sets down from the dude, there's a giant school of snook, but he has no idea because he just didn't take the time to physically or visually look into the water and see if there was any snook around. You have, it's just, it seems so silly, but it is what it is. And sometimes people miss easy things like that would have put them in a great situation to catch some nice fish. So moral of the story is look, see if there's some fish around. Pay attention to your surroundings and you might just catch an awesome fish. If there's no obvious bait schools, if there's no obvious fish around, the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and fish in areas that I know are more likely to hold fish than others. So, first thing you're not gonna wanna do is cast on top of a sandbar. Anytime you're fishing a pier, there's gonna be sandbars. Fish aren't gonna typically travel on those. What you are gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna fish in between the sandbars. So anytime there's a trough, fish on the backside of a sandbar. Areas like that, they're just avenues for fish to migrate through, and plenty of fish are gonna be swimming up and down. Next, you're gonna wanna look for structure. What's the easiest structure to find when you're fishing on a pier? Oh yeah, you in the back. Yeah, the pilings. It seems kind of silly, but those pilings have been there forever. They have a bunch of barnacles on them. Those barnacles are homes of crabs, shrimp. There are plenty of areas for little forage for fish to feed on. So fish around those pilings. Use that structure to your advantage. Don't be afraid to snag the pilings and break off and lose your rig. It's part of fishing. It happens to me all the time, and I've been doing it forever. Just put yourself in that situation. Think about where the fish would hang out. Are they gonna hang out in the desolate area where there's no bait, nothing going on? Or are they gonna hang around the pilings where there might be some fish, there might be some shrimp or crabs or something like that that they can feed on? There may be reef, there may be other structure that you know about on this pier. So fishing on that reef may put you in a better situation to get hooked up, vice just fishing on the bare sand, the bare desert. Think about where the fish might wanna hang out. And I'm willing to bet you guys are gonna catch more fish, or at least hook more fish. Lastly, if none of the three things have worked for you, if you can't see any bait, you haven't seen any fish, and you've been fishing around the structure and you're just not really getting anything, but there's another guy on the pier and he just seems to be catching stuff, you should try and pay attention to where that guy's fishing and what he's doing. Pier anglers are pretty friendly for the most part, so maybe politely go up and ask what that guy's doing. Pay attention to it. Fish around them, don't fish on top of them, that's just rude, but you can fish around that same area, it's a public place. Try and see what they're doing, and if there's someone catching something and it's a tight little area, fish around that area. You might just hook something. Y'all, if you like these kind of how-to tackle technique type videos, be sure to hit the thumbs up button. That's gonna allow this video to be shared with other people and allow the channel to grow. Put me in the position to make more videos like this for you guys. So hit that thumbs up button. Now let's get back to it. Secondly, is that a word? The second mistake that someone makes, or that newbie pier anglers or newbie land-based fishermen make, is they're improperly presenting their bait. And I could go on and on about this. I could honestly probably write like a whole ebook on just improper presentations or what proper presentations should look like. But for the sake of this YouTube video, let's just stick to the fundamentals. Let's stick to what you can apply to a little bit of everywhere. We'll divide it up into dead baits, live baits, and lures. Starting right off with dead baits. Dead baits typically are going to be fished best on the bottom. Not saying that that's the only way, but for simplicity's sake and for the simplicity of this video, let's just say that we're fishing all our dead baits on bottom. You want to use the lightest weight that you can, just the lightest weight that you can get away with, the lightest weight that the outside conditions are going to allow you to use. So what I mean by that is, let's say there's a lot of current. You want to use just enough weight that you're going to be able to hold bottom with whatever dead bait that you're using. You don't want it getting swept heavily and just getting dragged and not looking real. You want to keep that bait in that strike zone. You want to keep that dead bait in that strike zone. There's your lead down there kicking up a bunch of sand. It's going to look a little bit suspicious to fish. You might need to cast really far, so you might need to use a heavier weight in order to cast it out to that strike zone, out to that area. Maybe there's a bait school out there and you're trying to get a bottom bait right on the edge of the bait school. You might need to use a heavier weight just to get out there. And lastly, how big is your bait? You might need a bigger lead for a bigger bait. Shark fishing off the beach, for instance, we used to use whole pieces of cinder block in order to keep our bait down. Now think about how ridiculous like a little pilchard would look if you're using a cinder block. Of course that's ridiculous. Little pilchard this big, I'm gonna probably be using like a split shot or maybe a ½ ounce egg at the most. And it's really conditions based. But you wanna think, you want, with all of these things, with dead baits, live baits, lures, I want you guys to imagine, what would it look like if a fish was actually about to eat this bait? Is it natural enough? Can you actually imagine a fish eating this bait, or does it just look absolutely ridiculous? Now, fish do eat ridiculous things, right? But if we think through this a little bit logically, does it look like a natural presentation, or does it not? Let's err on the side of natural presentations in order to put us in the best position to catch some more fish. Live baits can be fished in a myriad of ways, but for simplicity's sake, let's just focus on live baits being fished on a flat line. So that would be just a hook and a leader, no weight or anything like that. So the bait is able to swim around naturally. Now, you want to match your hook to your bait size. So if we're fishing that 3-inch, 4-inch long pilchard, you don't want to stick a 10-0 12-0 shark hook in it. It's gonna, number one, it's gonna look ridiculous, but think about what that's gonna do to your bait. It's not gonna be able to swim around, and it's probably gonna die very prematurely compared to when it would have if you would have used, like, let's say a 1-0 or a 2-0 hook, something that it can actually swim around with and look like an actual bait, look like its natural self. And predatory fish are gonna react to that. If there's a giant hook dragging it down, they're gonna be like, what the heck, man? I'm not gonna eat this thing. But if it just has the little hook and it just looks like maybe a bait that's just slightly struggling, it's just slightly different from the pack, then that fish is gonna pounce, and then that fish is gonna eat that live bait. So just think through it a little bit logically. Take the time to change your hook size and match your hook to your bait. Our line is gonna do the exact same thing. So if we're using 100, 120 pound test on a little tiny bait, it's not going to be able to drag that around because that thick, heavy leader or thick, heavy line is just going to be dragging it down. So if we can drop down our leader, if we have the ability to, for sure, drop the leader down, drop the line down, use a lighter rod or something like that, and it's going to make the bait look more natural. It's going to look more like something that predatory fish are going to want to eat. Lastly, let's think about where we're casting it. So my rights and lefts are going to be all jacked up, so I'm just going to keep saying over here. But let's imagine we have the current coming from this way to that way. We want to cast up current. We want to cast here because that way when we cast our bait, cast him out, and he's swimming, he's just going to swim and he's going to drift naturally. If we cast him down current, he's just going to start getting drugged by the current, and we're not going to really be able to do all that much with him. So let's say there's a snook sitting right here. We cast up current of the snook and our little bait swims around. Boom, he's in the strike zone, and it looks like a natural presentation. Make sense, guys? I hope so. Clear as mud? You don't have any dead bait, you don't have any live bait. Lures are still a great way to just catch a little bit of anything. Let's take this voodoo shrimp, or just shrimp imitation, for instance. It can work great, but it needs the right presentation. So let's think again about where the current's going. If we have current coming from this way, going that way, we want to cast it up current and allow it to jig and move naturally, just like a shrimp would get pulled by the current in the wild, I guess. We want this to look naturally. If we cast it down current, it's just gonna kind of sit there. It's gonna look goofy. You're gonna be able to jig it up and down, but the current's gonna keep pulling it, and it's just gonna sit there looking like this, as opposed to jig, move, jig, move, jig, move, like any shrimp would. Next, guys. Most of you have probably seen this, and it's just the goofiest thing ever, but I'll say it anyways because some people just don't know what they don't know. Lures like this Rapala X-Wrap, things with treble hooks on the back of it, don't be that guy that sticks like a whole sardine or like wraps a piece of squid around the back treble hook because you're like, you know, there could be, let's add some scent to this thing, and then the thing swims upside down and skips on the top of the water. It doesn't look like it's supposed to. These lures are designed specifically to swim in a very elegant, very fish-like pattern. That's why they have their builds. That's why they're shaped the way they are. So fish the lures the way they're made. Now, you can 100% tip jigs and things like that with bait, and it's just a little bit more of an advanced technique. So for simplicity's sake of this video, for you guys that are real beginners, just fish the lure the way it's made. Don't overcomplicate things. Cast it out, reel it. It should be wobbling side to side, and if it's skipping on top, it's probably fouled, or there might be water in it, or the lure may be broken or something like that. You should see it swimming, looking like it should. So we've covered finding the right spot on the pier. We've covered presenting our lures or our baits or whatever it is in the right manner. Now we're hooked up to a fish. We've done everything right, and we're hooked up to that nice fish. It's ripping some drag, and we lose it. For some reason we lose it. We're not really thinking about what we did wrong. Well, there's a million little mistakes that new anglers make when they're fighting their fish that lead them to losing it. So let's cover some simple ones and some simple tips that can prevent, I don't want to say 100% prevent, but that can put someone in a much better situation, put them at a greater advantage to land that nice fish. The biggest thing, and I can't emphasize this enough guys, the biggest mistake that anglers make, that new pier anglers make when they're fighting a fish is they just stand there when they're fighting it. They don't move, they don't follow their fish. So if the fish is swimming to the left, they just kind of stand there and just watch and let Jesus take the wheel, and the fish is suddenly either wrapped around the end of the pier or he's got 10 other anglers tangled around his line, and pop, everything, he loses everything. You should follow your fish. When you're hooked up to a nice fish, or you're hooked up even to a smaller fish, you should keep them directly in front of you when you're on your pier. It's much different than a boat because the boat's gonna swing around, you're gonna have plenty of room, and the boat's pretty short, so you're able to just kind of maneuver just while keeping your feet planted. But on a pier, you are stationary and you need to follow that fish because not only are there other anglers, there's also structure that that fish can break you off on. So keeping him in front of you is huge, and it's going to prevent a lot of tangles, and it's going to prevent a lot of break-offs. Move your feet. Can't say it enough. Next, let's say you're fishing for snook underneath. You guys, returning subscribers and usual viewers of this channel, see I do a lot of snook fishing at the pier. Snook fishing is a little bit different, so it's going to sound a little bit counterintuitive to what I just said. And snook fishing, when you're fishing underneath the pier, you actually want to pull the opposite direction and kind of shimmy yourself the opposite direction that the fish is going. That's just because the fish is going straight for a piling and you want to keep them away from that piling, and the best method is to pull at the opposite angle that they're pulling. So I will take a couple steps to the right or a couple steps to the left if the fish is going that opposite direction a lot of the time. So if this seems confusing, it's really not. A lot of this comes with time, guys, and don't be overwhelmed by all of this information that I'm throwing at you if you're completely new to it. I'm trying to say it in as layman's terms as possible. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to explain it as simply as possible for you guys. If you're ever on structure, let's say you did not keep up with the fish and the fish is tangled around the piling or something like that, don't pull with all your might expecting the fish to come out just because you're pulling really hard. A lot of the time, actually loosening up and giving the fish a second to swim back around the piling is a better method. A lot of times just having that little bit of patience and watching, seeing what the fish is doing. Okay, if the fish is pulling this way, let me walk around this way and pull from this angle, and that actually may lead to you landing that fish. So slow down when you're tangled around structure. Structure will break your line if you're applying a lot of pressure to your line when it's rubbing up against it. So this video has really only been wave tops. It's really been just fundamentals, and it may not be diving into the nitty-gritty like a lot of you would want, but in my opinion, this is kind of the best way to structure a YouTube video. I do want to start creating a lot more informational content for you guys, so what I'm going to need from you is to comment down in the section below how you want to see informational content structured in the future. Would you like something that's location based, so beach fishing, pier fishing, inlet fishing, offshore fishing in Southeast Florida, offshore fishing in the Florida Keys? Or would you like to see something that's species based, snook fishing fundamentals, tarpon fishing, redfish, how to catch kingfish? Or would you like to see something a little bit more broad, seasonally based, summer fishing tactics, spring fishing tactics? Let me know, comment down below. I really appreciate it, guys. We made it. So we got through those 3 common fishing mistakes that guys make. And y'all, if this seemed a little bit too simple or if it seemed like a lot of information, either way, don't worry. We got plenty of more fishing content coming your way, more review videos, more travel. Y'all, there's a lot of stuff coming on this channel and I really can't wait. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see ya in that next video. Later.